Michael Madison and James Connor were more than friends. They were brothers forged in college. They had shared dreams over cheap beers and late-night study sessions. One of those dreams was to give back to the community that raised them. They both knew what it was like to grow up with little. This shared history was the glue that held them together. The idea struck James one afternoon on his grandfather's farm. The property was huge, 100 acres of perfect open land. He saw the old barn, filled with forgotten tools. He called Michael, his voice buzzing with a new idea. A charity event, something no one had ever seen before. Michael arrived the next day, his practical mind already organizing the logistics. They called it the Barnyard Games. It was a perfect blend of their personalities, James's rustic creativity and Michael's organized passion. The charity would be for underprivileged kids, a cause close to both their hearts. They walked through the dusty barn, tagging equipment. "Rake relay," Michael said, pointing to a row of old wooden rakes. "Garden shear toss," James added, holding up a pair of heavy, rusted shears. The air was thick with possibility and the smell of hay. They felt like they were on the verge of something truly great. Then James pulled out the centerpiece, an old, heavy-tined pitchfork with a weathered wooden handle. "This," James declared, "will be for pitchball." He explained the rules: baseball, but with a pitchfork for a bat and a soccer ball for the ball. Michael laughed, catching the vision instantly. They spent weeks promoting the event. Flyers were posted in every shop in town. Social media lit up with excitement. They collected donations, a flat fee to enter the games. 75% would go to the charity, the rest to cover costs. The community response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people signed up, eager for a day of fun. Michael handled the spreadsheets and donor lists meticulously. James worked the land, mowing a field for the pitchball game. Their friendship had never felt stronger. 2 days before the event, Michael was inspecting the tools. He picked up the pitchfork James had selected. He noticed a small hairline crack in the wooden handle near the metal tines. He ran his thumb over it, feeling the splintered wood. A small, cold seed of doubt entered his mind. He brought it to James, who was setting up hay bales for seating. "This looks a little beat up, man," he said, tapping the handle. James barely glanced at it, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It's fine, it's an old farm tool. They're meant to be tough," he replied. "Still, maybe we should grab a new one," Michael pressed. James sighed, looking at the long list of tasks still undone. "I'll replace it," he said dismissively. "I'll go into town tomorrow." Michael nodded, trusting his best friend. He set the pitchfork back against the barn wall. The decision was made, and the conversation ended. But James never went into town the next day. He got busy welding the targets for the shear toss. He had to fix a generator for the food stalls. The promise to replace the pitchfork was forgotten. It was a simple, careless oversight. The morning of the event arrived, bright and hot. Hundreds of cars lined the dirt road leading to the farm. Families spread out blankets on the grass. Music played from loudspeakers, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. Michael and James stood on a small stage, welcoming the crowd. The first few events were a massive success. The rake relay had people laughing and tumbling over each other. The crowd cheered as contestants tossed shears, trying to hit the wooden targets. They were raising thousands of dollars for the kids. It was everything they had dreamed of. Then it was time for the main event, pitchball. The crowd gathered around the freshly mown field. Michael, as the organizer, stepped up to be the pitcher. James, the host and the more athletic of the two, grabbed the bat. It was the same cracked pitchfork from the barn. Michael saw it in his hand and paused. "You didn't get a new one?" Michael asked, his voice low. James shrugged, giving it a test swing. "I forgot, man. It'll be fine," he said. "Don't worry about it." He seemed more focused on the crowd than the tool. Michael looked at the hundreds of expectant faces. He looked at the donation buckets already overflowing. They couldn't stop the game now. It was the moneymaker, the event everyone came to see. He made a choice, pushing his doubt aside for the good of the charity. "Okay," Michael said, "but just take it easy. Don't swing for the fences, it's just for fun." James laughed, tapping the pitchfork on the ground. Yeah, take it easy. Got it," he said, winking at a woman in the front row. He didn't seem to be taking the warning seriously. Michael walked to the pitcher's mound, a patch of worn-down dirt. He felt the weight of the soccer ball in his hands. He looked at his best friend, who was settling into a batter's stance. The air was electric with excitement. A strange, metallic sound came from the pitchfork as James tapped it again. Michael ignored the sound. He ignored the crack in the handle. He ignored his friend's obvious desire to impress the crowd. He was focused on the charity. He was focused on the smiling faces. James laughed off the strange sound, amped up by the cheering crowd. He was busy trying to impress the onlookers. Michael shouted from the mound, "James, I'm serious. Take it easy." James just waved him off, a cocky smile on his face. "Don't worry about it," he yelled back. "Throw the ball." Michael felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He looked at the crowd, then back at his friend. This was not the plan. Against his better judgment, he pitched the soccer ball a second time. He threw it gently, hoping to force a lighter swing. James saw the ball floating towards him. He ignored the warning from Michael. He ignored the crack in the handle he was holding. He swung with all his might, trying to hit a home run. He wanted to give the crowd a spectacular show. A loud, sharp crack echoed across the field, much louder than before. It was not the sound of a ball being hit. It was the sound of old wood shattering under immense force. The pitchfork handle snapped in two. The heavy metal head of the pitchfork, with its sharp tines, broke clean off. The metal projectile flew through the air. It moved faster than a baseball, a dark blur against the bright sky. It traveled directly towards the pitcher's mound. Michael saw it coming. He had no time to even raise his hands. The impact was sickening. The metal tine struck Michael directly in the face. He felt the bone in his eye socket crush instantly. An explosion of white-hot, unbearable pain blinded him. He felt the piece of metal slide deep into his head. Michael collapsed to the ground. He didn't make a sound at first. He was in too much shock. He instinctively brought his hands to his face. He could feel the warm, thick liquid gushing between his fingers. The soccer ball rolled slowly past him, completely forgotten. The music abruptly stopped. The cheering died, replaced by a single collective gasp from the crowd. A woman in the front row screamed. Then everyone was screaming. The festive day had turned into a nightmare. James Conner stood frozen at home plate. He was still holding the splintered, broken half of the handle. He stared in disbelief, unable to process what he had just seen. He thought, "I killed him. I killed my best friend." James dropped the handle and sprinted towards the mound. "James! James!" he screamed. He fell to his knees beside his friend. He saw the metal tine sticking out of his eye. The blood was everywhere, staining the dirt a dark crimson. Michael's wife, Sarah, fought her way through the panicked crowd. She saw her husband on the ground, writhing. She saw James kneeling over him, covered in his blood. "Call 911," James was yelling, his voice cracking. "Somebody call an ambulance now!" Michael was conscious, but the pain was beyond anything he had ever known. He couldn't see out of his right eye. He could only hear the screaming around him. He was terrified. He truly believed he was dying on that field. James tried to help, but there was nothing he could do. He was frantic, his hands shaking. I'm sorry, man," he kept repeating. "I didn't mean to. It was an accident." His words were meaningless against the agony Michael was in. Sarah was in hysterics, trying to comfort her husband. She looked at James with pure hatred. "You did this," she screamed at him. "He told you to stop. He told you." This was not a freak accident. This was a choice. The donors and families were frozen in horror. Some parents covered their children's eyes and rushed them away. The entire charity event, a dream of hope, was now a scene of trauma. The barnyard games were over. The day was ruined. Distant sirens grew louder. Paramedics rushed onto the field with a stretcher. They carefully stabilized Michael's head, warning him not to move. The pitchfork tine was still embedded in his skull. They had to leave it in for the surgeons. As they lifted Michael onto the stretcher, his one good eye found James. James was standing back, his face pale, his flannel shirt stained with blood. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. He looked guilty. He looked terrified of what he had done. Michael said nothing. He just stared at the man who had been his best friend. The pain was overwhelming, but another feeling was stronger. It was a cold, profound sense of betrayal. James had been reckless, and Michael was paying the price. The ambulance doors slammed shut. The siren wailed as it sped away down the long farm road. Michael's wife Sarah went with him. She didn't look back at James. She didn't say a word. James Connor was left alone in the middle of the field. The crowd dispersed in silence, avoiding his gaze. He was surrounded by the remnants of the party, tipped over chairs and abandoned plates of food. He looked at the broken handle in the dirt. He knew his life and Michael's would never be the same. The bright, warm farm was a distant memory. Now there was only the cold, fluorescent light of a courtroom. Michael Madison walked in, his gait unsteady. He wore a suit that hung slightly loose on him. His right eye was a prosthetic, realistic but lifeless. His wife, Sarah, sat behind him, her hands clasped tightly. Her face was etched with a permanent look of stress. Across the aisle, James Connor sat alone at the defendant's table. He looked thinner, his easygoing smile replaced by a hunted expression. The two former friends did not look at each other. The judge entered, and the room rose in unison. "The matter of Madison versus Connor," the judge stated, his voice flat. Michael's lawyer, a sharp woman in a gray suit, stood up. She began her opening statement, her voice cutting through the silence. She painted a picture not of an accident, but of gross negligence. She described two best friends building a dream. She described the noble cause that dream was built upon. Then she described how that dream was shattered by one man's ego. She pointed directly at James. "His recklessness," she said, "cost my client his eye, his job, and his life as he knew it." Michael was called to the stand. He moved slowly, deliberately, his lack of depth perception obvious. He took the oath, his hand trembling slightly. His lawyer began the questions gently. She asked him to describe his relationship with James. Michael spoke of their college days. He spoke of the shared idea for the charity. He described the excitement of the first barnyard games. His voice was quiet, monotone. This was a story he had rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times. The lawyer shifted to the day of the incident. "Tell me about the pitchfork," she said. Michael recounted finding the tool. He described the crack in the wooden handle. He described the warning he gave James. "And what was Mr. Connor's response?" the lawyer asked. "He said he'd replace it, but he never did. On the day of the event, I warned him again. I told him to take it easy." James stared at his hands on the table. He couldn't deny it. He remembered the conversation clearly. He had been too busy, too arrogant to listen. He had forgotten. Michael's lawyer then asked about the game itself. Michael described James's first swing, the one that made the strange metallic sound. "I told him to stop," to take it easy," Michael said. He was too busy trying to impress a girl in the audience. Sarah nodded from her seat, her jaw tight. The lawyer brought out a large, sealed evidence bag. Inside, caked in dried blood, was the metal head of the pitchfork. A juror in the front row put her hand over her mouth. "Is this what struck you?" "Yes," Michael whispered. The lawyer then displayed an X-ray on a large screen. It showed Michael's skull with the metal tine embedded deep inside. The image was horrific, clinical, and undeniable. The courtroom was utterly silent. Michael had to look away from the screen. The lawyer moved on to the consequences. "Mr. Madison, what is your daily life like now?" Michael described the simple things. "I reach for a cup of coffee, and my hand goes right past it. I have to be walked from place to place by my wife." He described the loss of his job as an architect, a job that required perfect spatial awareness. He described the depression that followed. "I look in the mirror," he said, his voice breaking, "and I see a nasty, empty hole. My wife doesn't look at me the same way." Sarah began to cry silently into a tissue. This was the part she couldn't bear. The intimacy, the partnership, it had all been damaged. Their plans to have children were now on hold indefinitely. This was the hidden cost of the injury. Michael's lawyer placed a thick binder on the railing. "These are the past medical expenses," she declared. $600,000 for surgeries he has already endured. She placed another, thinner binder next to it. "And this is the projected future medical expenses, $300,000. The lawyer walked back to her table. She let the numbers hang in the air. $900,000 in medical bills alone, a debt that would crush any normal family, a debt caused entirely by James's actions. "Finally, Mr. Madison," the lawyer said, her voice softening, "tell the jury about the pain." Michael described the phantom pains in his missing eye. He described the nightmares. He described the feeling of being disfigured. "This was not a freak accident. An accident is something no one could see coming. He knew the equipment was bad. I told him. He chose to swing with all his might. He chose to be reckless." He finally looked directly at James, his one good eye burning with cold anger. Michael's lawyer turned to the jury. "We are asking for $1.1 million for that pain and suffering, for a total award of $2 million. James Connor's lawyer, an older man with a weary face, stood up. He did not have the sharp energy of the plaintiff's counsel. He spoke in a low, somber tone. "What happened on that farm was a tragedy," he began. "It was a horrific freak accident, but it was not a crime of negligence." He argued that this was an event built by two friends. They shared the idea. They shared the work. They shared the passion for the charity, and therefore they shared the risk. James Connor was called to the stand. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a year. His testimony was quiet, his answers clipped. He admitted, "Yes, I forgot to replace the pitchfork." He said he was overwhelmed with other duties for the event. "Did Mr. Madison warn you about the pitchfork?" his lawyer asked. "Yes," James said. "We both looked at it. But he agreed to play. He was the one who said we could continue if I took it easy. It was a mutual decision to proceed." "Why did you swing so hard?" James looked at the jury, his eyes pleading. "I wasn't trying to impress anyone," he lied. "It's the main event. People paid to be there. We were playing a game, and I was playing to win. For the charity." Then he described the moment the pitchfork broke. He spoke of the pop he felt in his hands. He described the sound of the crowd screaming. He talked about the immediate, sickening fear. "I thought I had killed my best friend," he said, his voice thick. His lawyer guided him through the immediate aftermath. "And what did you do, James?" "I ran to him. I screamed for someone to call 911. I tried to help. I told him I was sorry. I was in shock. I thought my life was over too." James insisted this was not a one-sided failure. He claimed Michael was the one who pushed to play pitchball. "He kept saying it was his moneymaker," James stated. "That game was his idea, not mine. He was here for the greed and the money." This accusation hung in the air, a direct counterpunch. Michael looked at his lawyer, stunned. James was twisting the narrative. He was painting Michael as the greedy one, the one who pushed to play despite the danger. James's lawyer pressed the advantage. "Mr. Connor, did you try to help the Madison family after the incident?" "Yes," James said. "I did everything I could. I worked and tried to give cash toward the family. I helped them with their bills since he couldn't work." Michael's wife, Sarah, scoffed from the gallery. "A few $100s," she whispered angrily to her lawyer. "He calls that help against 600,000 in bills?" It was an insult, not a kindness. The defense was painting a picture of a caring friend, not a negligent man. The defense lawyer then brought up the legal doctrine of assumption of risk. "Mr. Madison is an intelligent man," the lawyer argued. "He saw the crack. He knew the tool was old. He knew the risk, and as the pitcher, he agreed to play the game anyway. You cannot agree to a risk and then sue when the risk becomes a reality." James's lawyer insisted that there were other games they could have played. "My client suggested they skipped pitchball. He claimed he offered to play anything else. But Mr. Madison insisted. He had flyers, he had dominors, he was making Michael the author of his own misfortune." The defense painted Michael's warning as a shared acknowledgement of risk. He didn't say, "Don't play." He said, "Take it easy." That is an agreement, a contract to proceed with caution. My client's only fault was playing the game too well. James looked at Michael, his first time making eye contact in the courtroom. "He was my best friend," James said, his voice cracking. "We've gone through so much together. This lawsuit, it isn't about his eye, it's about the money." He claimed Michael was a victim of his own greed, that Michael was the one who failed to stop the game, that he, James, was also a victim who had lost his friend and was now being financially destroyed. It was a desperate, ugly prayer from a guilty man. James's lawyer asked the jury to consider the source of the event. This was a charity, ladies and gentlemen, a noble cause for children. James Connor wasn't there to hurt anyone. He was there to do good. He said James was heartbroken too, that this incident was a terrible, tragic accident. He argued that the law does not require people to be perfect. It only asks them to be reasonable. And in the excitement of a charity event, their shared decision was reasonable. "This is not my fault," James said, his voice rising. "It was his idea the whole time. We were all at risk when we played. He could have stopped it at any time, just like I could have." He was spreading the blame, diluting his own responsibility. The defense lawyer rested his case. He asked the jury to find his client not responsible. Do not punish this man for a tragic accident. Do not destroy another life. The jury was left to weigh the arguments, negligence versus a shared, tragic mistake. Judge Alani's chambers were silent as she signed the final order. Back in the courtroom, Leo sat in a stunned, hollow trance, his lawyer whispering frantic, useless advice. The jury was dismissed, their job rendered obsolete by the confession. Martin just sat at the plaintiff's table, feeling the adrenaline drain, leaving him utterly hollow. There was no applause, No triumphant swell of music, just the quiet scratching of the judge's pen. Mr. Graves returned, sitting down slowly beside Martin. "It's done," Graves said, his voice soft. "The countersuit is dismissed, with prejudice. The judge is awarding full damages for the business, plus punitive damages for the emotional distress. She's also referring the perjury and fraud charges directly to the district attorney. You won, Martin, on every single count." Won. The word felt foreign, like a language Martin no longer spoke. He had won the right to be alone in a town that now saw him as a victor, but a cold one. He had won the right to his father's memory at the cost of his brother. He nodded to Graves, stood up, and buttoned his ill-fitting suit jacket one last time. The fight was over, but the war for his own peace was just beginning. He walked out into the courthouse hallway, the same one where he'd been swarmed. The reporters were there, but they kept a respectful distance. Their questions were no longer sharp, they were subdued. "Martin, how do you feel?" He just walked past them, his footsteps echoing in the marble hall. He had nothing left to say to them. He saw his sister, Sarah, standing near the exit, her face streaked with tears. She looked ashamed, lost, and desperate for him to fix what she had broken. She took a step toward him, her hand outstretched. "Martin, I'm so sorry." Martin stopped, 6 feet away. He looked at her, not with anger, but with a new sad clarity. He gave her a single, slow nod. It was not a nod of forgiveness, it was a nod of acceptance. He accepted that she had failed him. He accepted that this, too, was a casualty of Leo's betrayal. He turned and pushed open the heavy doors, walking out into the sun, alone. The news of Leo's perjury and arrest spread faster than the original lawsuit. The whispers in the diner changed again. Now they were whispers of pity for Martin and sharp, righteous anger at Leo. The town, which had demanded Martin be the bigger person, now scrambled to align with the truth. But for Martin, their validation had come far too late. Before he left the courthouse, Mr. Graves handed him a small padded envelope. Mr. Jessup was happy to return this, it's no longer evidence. Martin didn't open it until he was back in his truck. He pulled out the watch. It was cold from the evidence locker, and it felt impossibly heavy in his hand. He held the watch that cost him everything, his father's symbol of integrity. He had fought for it, bled for it, and torn his life apart for it. He did not put it on. He placed it gently on the passenger seat, a relic from a life that was now over. 6 months passed. The town's drama faded, as it always does. Leo Kovac pleaded guilty to perjury and felony theft, receiving a 2-year sentence. His new car was repossessed, his house was foreclosed. He had traded a 20-year brotherhood for $1,200 and a prison cell. The "For Sale" sign on the M&L Customs building finally came down. The locks were cut, the door rolled up, letting in a sliver of new light. Martin stood in the dusty, empty space, no longer a ghost. He was an owner. The next week, a new, smaller sign was mounted above the door. It didn't say M&L Customs, it said Riley Automotive. It was simple, clean, and honest. It was his name and his alone. We see Martin working under a car, his hands stained with fresh, honest grease. The shop is smaller, but immaculate. The tools are organized, the floor is swept. There is no face of the company and no mechanic. There is only Martin. The bell on the office door jangled. It was the waitress from the Morning Glory diner. She held out a fresh cup of coffee. "On the house, boss." He slid out, wiping his hands, and gave her a small, genuine smile. A new community was being built, one quiet conversation at a time. His sister, Sarah, had sent letters. He hadn't opened them. He was polite at the grocery store, but he didn't stop for idle chat. He was not the man he was before. He was someone stronger and sadder. He had learned the terrible, liberating truth that integrity is a solitary path. You cannot force others to walk it with you. And late in the evening, he finished his last invoice. He looked at the small wooden box on his new desk. His father's watch sat inside, nestled in the velvet. He looked at it every day. It was a reminder not of time, but of its worth. He shut off the lights, the familiar click echoing in his new old shop. He stepped outside, the air cool and clean. He looked at his own wrist. He wore a simple $20 digital watch. Its plastic face was scratched from honest work. He locked the door to his shop. He heard the satisfying thud of the dead bolt. It was the sound of security. It was the sound of ownership. It was the sound of a future he had paid for in full. He had faced the consequences of his morals and survived. He did not look back at the shop. He walked to his truck, not with the swagger of a victor, but with the steady gait of a man who knows exactly who he is. He had been tested down to the bone. He had been betrayed by his brother, abandoned by his family, and shunned by his town. But he had not sold his father's watch. He started the engine, a familiar rumble, a comfort in the quiet dark. Martin Riley had lost a friend, but he had saved himself. And in a world full of compromise, that was the only victory that mattered. He put the truck in gear and drove home. In the end, the story of Madison versus Connor is not truly about a $2 million verdict. It is a story about the heavy price of a broken promise and the blinding cost of ego. It teaches us that a good heart is not a defense against a reckless act. James Connor never intended to harm his friend. He intended to do good for charity. But the law, like reality, cannot judge our intentions. It can only judge our actions. A court must weigh the facts, and the facts are clear. A warning was given, and it was ignored. A small, careless oversight, a forgotten promise to replace a tool, set the stage for catastrophe. But the final tragic act was one of pride. When James chose to swing for the crowd instead of listening to the friend who trusted him, he made an irreversible choice. He placed a single moment of personal glory above a lifetime of friendship. The gavel falls and the money is awarded, but the money is simply a consequence. The true lesson is that the deepest injuries are not always to the body. A hospital bill can be paid, and a wound can be mended, but a friendship, once shattered by such a profound betrayal of trust, can never be made whole again. Michael Madison lost his eye, but James Connor lost his friend, and that is a loss for which no court can ever award damages.